Welcome, everyone. Thanks, Julie, for the invite. Thanks, Laura, for playing with us today. Super excited about this theme. This is something I've done a lot of thinking about in my teaching. And just to give you an idea of kind of where we're going, I'm going to give just a very, very brief overview of the concept of play and how play and pedagogy relate a little bit theoretically. And then I'm going to walk you through a project that I've run, gosh, 4 or 5 times now. I've really institutionalized it into my teaching. Some of you have probably heard me talk about it before, the Ivanhoe concept. And then I'm going to turn the floor over to Laura, and she's going to do her take on it as well. So let me get my screen share going and see if I can make this work. Okay. I just demoed this and made it work beautifully. And now I'm like, there we go, play, sorry. Okay, great, so we're full screen. Everybody can see it, okay, right? Give me a, yeah, okay, great, thank you. First of all, a little Shining reference. All of us have had a little too much work and no play with the pandemic. So for your viewing enjoyment. I want to just talk a little bit about what play is. There's a vibrant body of philosophy and theory on play. And so my kind of go-to thinker here is Roger Caillois from the early part of the 20th century, who breaks out 6 features of play by way of defining what it is in a philosophical sense. Play is, you know that you're in a space of play when it's voluntary. It's separate from everyday life. And so we think about the way that the game space is kind of limbed off, sometimes literally in the case of a soccer field or something, sometimes figuratively by a certain kind of ritualized space-time that we occupy together to escape from regular life. Play is uncertain. It has contingencies. We never know in advance how the outcome is going to work out. Play is by definition unproductive, although this is a little bit trickier because we can certainly think of ludic spaces and whole industries that are built around play, you know, professional sports leagues and whatnot that might question that a little bit. Play is rule governed. And very importantly, for my purposes, play has a subjunctive mood. If we think about it in terms of grammar, there's an aura of as if around play, whereby we engage in some kind of regressive, pleasurable, childlike make-believe when we enter the play space. So what is playful teaching? What does teaching have to do with play? And here I'm very influenced by my friend and former graduate school comrade, Mark Sample, who's a digital humanist at Davidson College, who talks about how what we think of as sort of normal teaching resembles, in his view, zombie play. It has some of the features of play that Caillois emphasizes, but in terms of having those constrictions, it's the academy and the classroom is separate in some sense from regular life. And it certainly has all the rules and strictures and kind of is sort of limbed off through grades, rubrics, assessments, etc. But in Sample's view, it tends to lack that kind of real sense of freedom, of passion, of contingency, of open-endedness that makes play so engaging and pleasurable. So he recommends experimenting with a playful pedagogy in which we emphasize low stakes creativity and try to have students reach a kind of flow state where those extrinsic factors, and I think especially he's thinking about grades and other kind of high stakes modes of assessment, sort of melt away and allow students to get absorbed in the process in and of itself. So I just want to kind of schematize this a little bit, again, pulling through Mark's very excellent article on play through the Keywords series in digital pedagogy from the MLA's website. If you're not familiar with that, you should certainly check it out. I'm going to post all of these slides later, and I have lots of links to this article, for example, and lots of other materials, so you can go back and look at them later if you're interested. So whereas zombie play is characterized by being high stakes, playful pedagogy is low stakes, zombie play characterized by certainty, playful pedagogy practices ambiguity, and finally this very important distinction between convergent thinking in the sense of heading towards an answer that's predetermined versus this more divergent thinking that has students kind of move in different directions according to the contingencies of the play. So I always like to think in my pedagogy about problems and how to solve them, you know, rather than sort of thinking about techniques or technologies in the abstract. And so for me, I think the real motivating force in my particular project was how to teach students how to do research, real meaningful research in the discipline, especially in those kind of middling levels of the curriculum. So in our department, and I'm sure in many of your departments, we have a very structured approach to teaching the base level skills at the entry level. And then we have expectations that at the 300, the 400 honors seminar level, that they've sort of gotten almost all the way to some kind of mastery of the discipline. The middle spaces often get neglected, and that's where I spend a lot of my time teaching. And so I thought about, how do I teach students to research? How do I build the scaffolding in to teach those kind of middling stages of the process? And I especially found myself frustrated that students had a hard time grasping the heterogeneity of different methodologies in our discipline. So in English, you know, the difference between theory-based approaches, historical-based approaches, cultural materialist-based approaches, sociological distant reading-based approaches. But I think it's very non-obvious to students that there are all these different ways of thinking about literature that might find their way into their research, and we don't really have time often to go through them in a systematic way. Finally, we tend to very lazily say, go away, come back and give me 15 pages at the end of the semester, with maybe like an annotated bibliography as a little bit of scaffolding. And that's a very high stakes enterprise where, you know, half of the grade for the semester might come in at the very end. And I wanted to build in some more low stakes way of practicing these skills, especially for students in the middle of the curriculum. So my solution here is playing this game concept called Ivanhoe. And I'm sort of playing a little bit with Mark Sample's ethos here of playing, and the sort of guilty pleasure of playing when you should be working or teaching or whatever. So Ivanhoe is a model that I did not devise, a model that grew out of some textual scholars at the University of Virginia in the early 2000s for transforming a novel into a role-playing game, sort of along the lines of Dungeons and Dragons, if you've ever played that or watched Stranger Things, or, you know, had kids get into it. In Ivanhoe, rather than read a novel together and critique it and provide some kind of exegesis or research project on it, each player chooses and then builds a character in and around the world of the novel. And then the teams reenact this novel through acts of writing, original creative moves from the perspective of their character, whatever it may be. And we'll get into some of the choices and ways you can structure it in a moment. So in this sense, I think Ivanhoe is less of a game. When we think of the term game, we think of something that's highly structured, that's oriented towards a kind of win state, accumulating points, competing against other players. It's more radically an act of play, and it has a lot of it really does scratch some of the same itches as that sort of childhood, you know, toddler into preschool era of one's development, when you engage in imaginative play, playing dress up, right? Inhabiting other characters, playing house, that sort of thing. It has some of that energy behind it, although it is taken, of course, in a more, you know, sort of sophisticated and serious way. So we'll see how this works out in a moment. In terms of how I have assigned this structure, and again, I've done it 5 or 6 times now, so I kind of have a system down. Somewhere in the middle of the semester, I'll divide students into small groups. I find that 3 to 6, depending on what kind of text you're dealing with, is a kind of nice number. And then I will allow the students to self-organize into roles where they will choose to play a character in a novel, the author, or maybe even perhaps, depending on the novel, the narrator as a separate persona that you could play. And very importantly, and I'll spend a lot of time talking about this, the peritextual figures. So peritextual in literary critical lingo means figures who are kind of adjacent to or obliquely related to the world of the text, but not in the action of the text. So we can think about editors, book reviewers, friends of the author, members of literary coteries that participate in a particular kind of text, and so on. And so you'll see some of the creative choices students made in exploring this peritextual dimension. Already, I hope you can see that a number of different methodologies are implied by this distribution of roles. So characters obviously puts you in that kind of close reading space where you can read what critics have said about the way that characters play a role in a text. Playing the author obviously forces you to do a lot of biographical research and learn about the author's life. Peritextual figures helps push you into these different methodological areas. So Textual criticism, thinking about how texts were actually made, produced, and consumed, especially. I think this game was devised by scholars in that tradition. I think it really lends itself to thinking about the material text and the kind of production, consumption, dissemination, afterlife, reception of texts. In terms of the assignment structure, back in the good old days when we actually met face-to-face, we would meet in the library, and I have collaborated with librarians and gotten an actual just physical cart of pre-selected books to kind of streamline some of the work of getting appropriate materials. So students can sort of circulate around and swap and share appropriate sources. We also do a little bit of review on how you might find appropriate sources using databases and kind of traditional research skills as well. I assign students 1 move per class session. So this would be something like 2 per week in a course that meets in 2 75-minute segments. And we might make 5 or 6 moves over the course of 2 or 3 weeks of class time. Again, a move is an action in the plot or a reaction to another's move. A move tends to be a blog post length exercise of writing, so maybe 500 to 1,000 words in the voice of your character. Importantly, moves can be radically playful in ways that make us think of kind of postmodern literature and criticism, where the author can speak to the characters can speak to the editors, critics can speak back to authors in ways that are often extravagantly implausible and playful. Finally, each move is paired with a kind of back-end journal entry that is not a part of the game space, where there's a reflective opportunity where students can reflect on why they wrote the way that they did, what sources they cited in their piece, sort of shifting from the first-person voice of the move to the third-person, more traditional disciplinary voice of the kind of literary critic. Evaluation criteria, I'm just gonna go through this super quickly because I want to get on to the specifics of some of the moves. I have kind of an eccentric set of criteria that I often use for these more open-ended projects that especially emphasizes this reflectiveness piece, the third term on the chart, where I look at that journal entry section and look at the kind of back-end work that they're doing to justify their moves and to have them think in a little more of a metacognitive way about why they're doing what they're doing and how it worked. So I want to dig a little more into how students choose roles and what happens when they choose certain kinds of roles. And I'm going to use this example of a recent version, instance of Ivanhoe focusing on Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. I'm choosing that since I think that text may be a little bit more familiar to more of you than some of the more obscure texts. So here, very interestingly, a student chose a peritextual figure who she imagines to be a doll maker in this novel by Toni Morrison that, as you may know, is about an African-American young girl's agonized relationship to a white doll that's supposed to be this image of white beauty. And so Sasha Winters is a doll designer in the 70s, sort of feminist and anti-racist, who is pushing Mattel to design dolls of color, the first kinds of dolls of color that were in mainstream circulation in the US. And this is, interesting bit of historical research and turns out to kind of be historically the case, but it's fictional. So she's creating this kind of avatar to typologically, in a kind of, way that reminds us of realist fiction, point to something real. You can see also this is the actual page whereby this student builds her character and presents her character to the other players in the game. And that has a kind of a sturdy presence in the game space. I want to emphasize that, as I said very briefly a moment ago, the different levels of author text and paratext all kind of get breached and swapped together in the course of gameplay if it's successful. So I've linked to all of this, and if you want to explore it later, you can. I won't do that right now in the interest of time. But Toni Morrison, in this instance of the game, which I played myself because I wanted to be able to kind of push the action of the game along, muses about meeting the doll designer, Winters, at a party. And so we kind of imagine this simultaneity of the author and the person thinking about the dolls at the same moment. We have the doll designer Winters writing to one of the characters and actually offering one of her dolls in a kind of surreal way to one of the characters in the text that has inspired her to design this doll. And so they have kind of an interesting back and forth. Finally, a character last name Diamond, who is a real historical figure who adapted Morrison's novel for the stage in the 2000s, writes a fictional but plausible school board member in Ohio who is pushing to ban Toni Morrison's book from school curricula because it features themes of rape and incest that were deemed inappropriate, not just in Ohio, but all over the country. The Bluest Eye is one of the most frequently banned books at the K-12 level. So again, all this kind of paratextual interactivity is a strong characteristic of this game and helps to have students think about the relationship between the internal dynamics of the text and then the extrinsic world of the text, of the paratext around it. Another aspect that students can explore creatively in this mode of play is material text issues. So here, I, playing Toni Morrison, actually stole some Princeton letterhead from the web, and because Morrison was a professor at Princeton for many years, and had her write a letter from her letterhead to the person who was working on an adaptation of The Bluest Eye. So, and inserted that object into the game space. So in other words, you don't have to just use the kind of typing into WordPress into the interface. You can actually create physical objects of different kinds and put them in. I also included a sample from Spotify and plugged it into one of my pieces to give background music to my interior monologue of Morrison sitting in her house at 4:30 in the morning writing before her kids woke up, which was her habit, and imagining a song from 1968, which was the time in which she's composing the piece. So we can kind of play with this multimodal aspect of WordPress in thinking about different media making their way into our analysis. So that's all I'm going to say, and I'm happy to talk about more details in the Q&A, but I just wanted to show you that I have links to several different versions of this game on several different texts over the past 3 or 4 years. And just to point out that this started out as kind of a crazy one-off that was a hell of a lot of work to kind of get going and learn how to do. And it's become kind of more institutionalized, where it's something that I do almost every year, at least once. And I find that it really does motivate students and help them learn a lot about this kind of, middling level of skill at research. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Laura now at this point. Thank you so much.
Wowzer, that was like amazing. Mine is like really gonna, you're kind of come way downhill from that. So if everyone would just go to the chat for a second, open up your chat, and just tell me if you're alive. I would just love to know that. Just say, yes, I'm alive, or whatever. Kind of, barely. Jeff, you're very alive. Look at what you just did. Alive-ish. Okay, this is good. If everyone could, I'm not going to make you, of course, turn on your camera, but if you would just turn on your audio or turn off your mutage, and just do a pretend laugh, everyone. Oh, that felt good. Okay, thank you, Elaine. I love it. I love the little tears. Okay, that's good. We're alive. All right, so let's just like stretch our arms up and take a deep breath. Okay, we're here. This is freaking amazing, because don't we all have like way too much to do, and we're here. So I think you people are awesome, especially Stephanie, who's on channel 2 from 1978. Okay, so coming off of that extremely intellectual presentation, and Jeff uses words that I don't actually know how to pronounce, so I think that's amazing. And I learned so much from you, Jeff. You're incredible. Amazing assignments. Students are truly lucky to get into your class. So I am going to also share screen now, and I'm going to ask you to go to the chat. And if you would tell me in the chat, have you ever, gone to an escape room, like a physical one in the real world? Sometimes they're called a breakout room, or not a breakout room. We've all been in a breakout room. Too many. But a physical, like you go there and you do an escape the room experience. Anyone? Ooh, Elaine. Okay. Anyone else? Elaine, do you mind telling us about it? About the experience in an actual escape room? And Anna also. Cool. So Anna, do you want to unmute and tell us a little bit what it was like?
Sure.
Thank you.
The escape room was in Harlem, and it was for my birthday. And we, a couple friends and family, we went, and we had to follow certain clues to find the next clue to then get out.
Okay, great. And so you were in there with other people, right? And
Yeah.
you had to like kind of work together to figure out how do we get out of the room. So was it fun?
The best. Until we lost, then we were like, we were cheated.
We're stuck in here. And I love this. Isn't the pandemic escape room we're all stuck in? Oh, that's so true. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what they are, why you'd want to do them, how you want to make one, and we're going to do one, a really short one. I made like a baby version for us. So escape the rooms are these physical spaces that you go, like Elaine said, for a birthday party, an event, team building, and they might look something like this. And you basically have a situation that you're given, and you have to kind of get into this, situation, imaginary situation, and solve clues, follow the trail, unlock puzzles to be able to leave the room. Now, I don't think because of fire code they can really lock you in there, but that's the idea. And the obviously moving us into, the digital world is that we recreate this idea of answering questions, following clues, working together to escape a digital room. So essentially it's a lot of clicking around is basically what it is. So you're creating the story, you're creating the situation, the clues, but you're not going anywhere physically, as you can imagine. So this idea of like gamification, which is what Jeff is, did such a good opening about, all of the instructional aspects, the engagement aspects, the cognitive processes, all of those. And so sometimes I think it's helpful to think about gamifying something and something also being game-like, because some of I'm sure a lot of us, activities or tasks that we do with students might have a game-like quality. Maybe there's a jigsaw where Maria puts certain students in one room that have information and then they have to exchange. So there's a lot of times good interactive activities have a game-like quality. Gamification is, I guess, that next step further where you're thinking about how a lot of students enjoy playing, let's say, video games where they're getting tokens or they get rewards. And in the, I guess, the brain science tells us that rewards are in sort of the same area as novelty. So we kind of crave the novelty, and it kind of keeps us interested. So the instructional rationale for doing gamification, especially with a digital escape room, it has this sense of mystery or surprise, fun. There's a sense of urgency, and it builds that camaraderie with others. For those of you who are trying to get students either to learn a foreign language, or you really just want them to be able to express or vocalize a lot of the thinking they have, it creates this context for interaction. It has this 21st century learning aspect to it because you send people along a trail that there's no one way to get an answer. There's maybe multiple ways to find the answer, and it involves a lot of searching, multimedia, etc. And in terms of how you would situate it, it could happen in so many ways. In other words, you could set up a digital escape room that has nothing fundamentally to do with the content, let's say, of Dante, okay? But when they get to the end, they might discover something about Dante. Or it could be you want them to review information that you've already taught about Dante, and in so doing, they can escape the room. So you can play with it as team building towards the beginning of the class with less content and more personal content, life content. You can place it kind of like Jeff was talking about as an intermediary activity between like a final project, but a processing tool. Or it could even be like a culminating activity. In fact, that's how I use it, and I'm going to be using it this semester. I kind of pull up a lot of content we've done in the semester and also just fun inside jokes from the semester, and I throw them all together, and it's a way to kind of celebrate, in a way, the end of the last class. Okay, so are we ready? Okay. Now, you cannot disappear on me, people, because I promise this breakout room is going to be like 3 minutes, all right? So don't leave me. I'm going to track you down, people. I'm looking at all the names. So this is the situation. You are part of a group of space explorers, all of you here. You're originally from the Cuniverse system. You know the Cuniverse? Okay. Far, far away from the Milky Way. A member of your team has flown off course and has landed on the planet Earth. You are now in Earth's orbit, and you need to quickly decide, is it safe to land on the surface of our planet to find your team member? Your mission is to discover 4 facts about the planet to know if you can survive there, okay? Now, I'm not going to make you go, it's seriously short, okay, people, so don't panic. What's going to happen is, you Cuniverse astronauts, I know you're very expert in the Cuniverse because we've been there for a little while. Hola, papi. Okay, so we're going to go space exploration. So Julie's going to put you in a breakout room in a second, not yet, of about 4 people. What I would do in class is I actually only give one person in the room the link. This way, that person, let's say I said, Jack, you're going to be the group leader. Here's the link. He goes into the breakout room and he shares his screen, and everyone has to yell at him and tell him, and they can use their own devices, but then they have to tell him the answer. It forces them to communicate, because obviously when I give everybody the link, everyone can just do it independently. But since Julie and I aren't sure, some of you are going to be like, I'm out of here. I didn't want to do that. So I am going to give everybody the link. But if you could try to play along and be Team Cuniverse, when you go into your breakout room, maybe one of you can pull up the screen and share, or at least just talk through. Okay, so here we go. Here's the link. I'm going to put it in the chat. So everyone should click on this link before you leave our main session so that you don't say, where is it? Okay. And maybe a couple of you can give me a thumbs up when you have that open. Okay. So that's all I'm going to say. And I'm going to just see what happens. And I think we're going to say, can you do this in, 5 minutes? We will go in and check on you. So if, see, Anne, there's always someone who has to head out. So this is fine. You have the link. No problem. Julie, you ready? All right, everybody, go. You've got 5 minutes to save your Cuniverse colleague.
They are.
So I debated putting the lock here because I knew you guys would all go to the lock and start to just try to answer the questions. And that's not the point. And that's why I made those questions too hard to answer without more information. So eventually you're going to have to start to say, like, what is this? Let me click here. and that opens, right? What's happening here? What's happening here? Oh, this opens, okay? So it does create a level of, you know, frustration, but this is, the answers were all here. And one of the things that I think is important to think about when you're designing them, which you experienced just now, of course, is it can't be too hard or too easy. And it's kind of this Goldilocks situation. So for some of you, once you knew to click, it's easy because the questions are not very hard. So you kind of have to think about, to what extent do you tell everybody? Because there will be a frustration factor, and people, it kind of forces them to have to talk to each other. And, but you don't want to make people so stressed that they're like, I gotta go, I'm never coming back to ACERT again. So it's kind of like in the middle. And of course it's hard because, you know, I just gave like obviously a couple of clues, really quick ones there. So I do recommend keeping it very short at first, maybe just a couple of clues so they get the feel for it. I wouldn't tell them exactly where to click because there's no mystery then in that. Usually someone will figure it out. The storyline, like the Cuniverse or whatever, is not that important. They'll buy any story pretty much. The ciphers or the clues, there's just tons and tons of resources of ideas of how to make those. Essentially the whole thing obviously is just URL linked. A lot of people make Google Forms into their, where they place the locks, because you can set a Google form to only accept certain characters or not and give clues. And there can obviously be other ways. I used this tool Flippity because I think that's the easiest one to use. And I just wanted to show you, I realized I didn't put this into my presentation, but I have a whole Padlet with tons of information about digital escape rooms that can give you pre-made rooms. So when I first was interested in them, I tried to do, my son knows a lot about Star Wars, so we did the Mandalorian escape room, and I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't answer any of the questions because some of them are very sophisticated. It's like a New York Times crossword. You got to figure out what is it they're trying to get at. And he figured it all out. He's like, oh, that's like Star Wars language. We have to go on the translator and go into a translation tool to translate this. I mean, there's so many things you can kind of do with it. So I do recommend, if it kind of intrigues you, to take a look. I'll put my link to this Padlet in the chat to check out, you know, what's already been done. And there's some really simple ones. There's more really complicated ones. And thinking about creating your own, keeping it as simple as possible, you know, with links and potentially using the Flippity tool. And to have students make them. Students can actually make them for each other in groups and have each other go through a digital escape room as well. So I'm going to stop there just so that people can ask questions to Jeff and to me. And I'm also going to put in the link to Flippity, so you have that as well in the chat. Okay. Thanks, everybody. At least you stayed awake. That's good.